Hello, good evening from Lebanon. Um, and I can say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all speakers, delegates, members, and participants, depending actually upon the time of the day where you are located. I am Anis Al Haroub. I'm elected member of the Executive Committee for the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children and Associate Professor of Educational Psychology and Special Education at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our last keynote speaker, Dr. Gilman Whiting. Dr. Whiting will talk about globally reframing giftedness, the equity work that enables a brighter, stronger future for all. This keynote is sponsored by the Future Problem Solving Program International. Let me introduce Dr. Gilman. Dr. Gilman Whiting is an associate professor and director of graduate studies for the Department of African American and Diaspora Studies. He directs the Scholar Identity Institute and the Black Male Initiative at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. His areas of research include disparity and underperformance in special and gifted education, sociology of race, sports, and American culture, qualitative research methods, and young fatherhood initiatives. Dr. Whiting is the founding chair of the Achievement Gap Institute at the George Peabody College of Education at Vanderbilt, and another intensive summer institute designed to work with key school personnel on issues of historical importance, including equity, diversity, and inclusion. Dr. Whiting's work has been used internationally in India, Australia, Brazil, and Lebanon. He consults with numerous school districts and programs nationally and internationally. Dr. Whiting serves as the co-chair of the Diversity and Equity Committee for the National Association for Gifted Children. I'm very happy that Dr. Gilman and I share the same research interest on marginalized and vulnerable populations for the gifted. And I'm happy that I hosted Dr. Gilman about 8 years ago in Lebanon in my class in education psychology, talking about similar issues on similar research interest. So, Dr. Gilman, I would like to welcome you again, and I would like to leave the screen to you, okay?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I just wanted to say thank you. It's my honor, actually, to speak here today. I would like to thank the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children for inviting me. Also, Professor Anis, I had a great time while in Lebanon. I loved the food, loved the company. Your students were great. I do remember that occasion very specifically. So thank you for your introduction, but also your work you do in the field we share, but also with 2E. I think everybody should take a look at Dr. Haroub's work. Today, I'm going to act as what I call a gifted education griot. Now, in West Africa, the holder of the title griot is an oral tradition or repository, if you will, a historian. Often is seen as wise leader due to their position and closeness to royal advisors, as well as they talk to common folk. So they are the keepers of history and how things pass down. Regarding gifted education, in this meeting we have here today, we all are the royals in that, because we are the gatekeepers. We are the ones who actually allow or don't allow students into programming. And we're also the common folk, because we came from these very same places. I want to share something with you with an author some time ago said this. He said that I am for truth, no matter who tells it. I am for, let me move this out of the way real quick. Thank you. I am for truth, no matter who tells it. I am for justice, no matter who it's for or who it's against. I am a human being first and foremost. And as such, whoever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole. That was El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Some of you might know him as Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a person who actually set a standard for a lot of people. And what he did was he was able to cross barriers, cross lines, and talk about this. But he also said something else I want to share with you. He said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Think about that now. Think about mass media and what it's doing with us right now. But in order for us to make true progress, we have to talk about some very hard truths, some very uncomfortable truths. A keynote for me is a chance to talk. I don't have to stick to a script of doing this research citing thing, but everything I talk about, contact me if you're interested in the area of research or anything I talk about, and I'll love to take it on, have questions in the comments, and we'll talk later. But any good researcher knows that past behavior is a good predictor of future performance. So what has our past been? What have we done in the past? What can we do to achieve the future that is best for all humanity? As Frederick Douglass once said, there is no progress if there's no struggle. And that has been true throughout time. I want us today to stay focused as much as possible on the elephant in the room. You see him behind me. That's just not there for colorful background. The elephant in the room are the missing and underserved children. If and when you feel the pangs of uncomfortable truth hitting close to home, you feel like I'm talking a little bit too much about you, your work, somewhere you are, focus on the elephant, because it's about the children and how we find and how we move forward with the future. I want to thank the Future Problem Solving Program International for sponsoring my talk as well, because I actually went on the site and actually joined up. So y'all go and do that too, because I think with kids, and I'll talk about it at the end towards mentoring, because I saw some things on there that very much interested me. So we talk about our research, yes, but only how it relates to bettering children's outcomes, not our personal fears or our personal emotions. I take some time with this because I know that when I talk, sometimes it starts to make people feel eerily uncomfortable. We want to move past if their past does not affect the present. It's amazing to know, for example, 3 months ago, just 3 months ago, if you ask some politicians in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else around the world about critical race theory, they would look at you as if you had two heads. But today, everybody have seemed to have gotten a degree of some kind in the last 3 months. You can't turn on the news or see a politician without talking about some form of critical race theory. Critical race theory. Perhaps if we had a degree in critical race theory, we wouldn't be in this position we are in today. I may return to this later, time and Q&A. I know many of my colleagues view gifted as a number, as a set numerical value, a cutoff score, if you will. So my conversation about wealth, houses, cars, historical truth probably won't make sense to a lot of you. But what I'm asking here is, as a village, because it takes a village to raise a child, African proverb, not Hillary Clinton. On this meeting here, I want us to attempt to stay focused on that. Children, the elephant in the room, and the best ways forward. The state of gifted education in this world, the disparity of gifted and talented students who have or don't have access, the overwhelming disproportionality of children around the globe who are underserved should make us all feel a sense of embarrassment. That's what moves us. At least an undeniable urgency with one goal, an international, inclusive, and equitable focus on locating, developing, and displaying finding children who display gifts and talents, but also nurturing them. Not just finding, but nurturing them and retaining them by making them feel welcome, making them feel comfortable in our programs. Now, globally, I know that'll cost billions, but we must ask ourselves, are the lives and the futures of our children, all children, worth it? Speaking of what's worth it, during that trip, I remember going to Dubai. Now, I love sports cars, DeLoreans, Ferraris, etc. Recently, while visiting Dubai, I exited my hotel, and there sat 3 cars sitting right next to my hotel door. I love fast cars. There was a Porsche 918 Spider, probably just shy of $1 million. There was a Lamborghini, just not a Lamborghini, it was a Aventador LP 704. Goes 200 miles per hour. And I know we're international, so that's around 350 kilometers per hour. And lastly, there was a Bugatti Veyron. This car is just shy of $2 million. I learned that later on that this car was the fastest car that they had in their fleet, reaching speeds of over 400 kilometers per hour, or 250 miles. So yes, standing in front of my hotel there with an airport just behind me where you could parasail and all that, and looking out in the parking lot, there's $3 million in vehicles sitting there. And they were police cars, by the way. Yes, police cars. I'm not hating on Dubai. Love Dubai. They even have an indoor gigantic place where you can go skiing inside, complete with penguins in the desert. We now live in a world where you can make cars that cost north of $1 million. Houses in India, in the UK, in United States that cost hundreds of millions, even over $1 billion. Take a ride, a personal ride on a space rocket, and live on yachts that cost $15 million just because we can. Now, at the same time, we have children who are languishing in fields, who are used and abused daily, trafficked and enslaved. Modern day colonialism, modern day slavery, modern day eugenics all still exist. From the provinces in China, where over the past 40 years, great strides have been made to lower the poverty rate, still nearly a quarter of the population of the world's most populous country still can barely afford to eat. While working and traveling through India, through more than 15 states, the world's second most populous country, from Assam and Calcutta in the northeast and east, over to Ahmedabad, down to Mumbai and Goa in the west, and then down to Kochi in the south, back across to Chennai and up to Hyderabad, up to New Delhi. Academic and physical poverty amidst luxury and wealth was palpable. Around the globe, we see it. All around the globe, Africa, all across ravaged continent of Africa. Africa, in terms of natural and mineral resources, is the richest continent in the world. If not divided by Europe into countries that they could control and colonize, it would be the second most populous. It is the second most populous continent in the world, and will be the most populous in the next 20 years. A continent to this day, countries to be, for example, Walter Rodney wrote in 1972, he wrote a book called How Europe Undeveloped Africa. Today, Africa is still exploited and left in poverty. Of the top 25, let me change the slide here. Of the top 25 most populous countries in Africa, in the world, of the top 25 poorest, in the world, 22 of those are in Africa. 22 out of 25. The 3 others are up in Tajikistan, 22, Afghanistan at number 7 in South Asia. But the only other Black nation that made this list outside of the continent of Africa made it for one reason only. At one time, it was the richest and most productive European colony in the world. But like America with Great Britain, this nation fought successfully for its independence. Well, actually, unlike America, its freedom. Now, and as such, was the only Black nation to successfully rebel against a European power and take its freedom. But under threat of a superpower, France, returning just 20 years later, they made this tiny nation pay France what they called independence debt. I call it reparations, for 122 years. So from 1825 to 1947, France and America's Citibank bled this small nation. In fear of rebellion of its enslaved folks on its shores, United States would then embargo the nation, and all other European nations followed suit. Now you say that's a long time ago, but it was only 2010 when the devastating earthquake hit the small nation did the French foreign minister finally cancel Haiti's debt. Haiti makes the list at number 16. Much like my nation's first indigenous people in North America, the ongoing abhorrent treatment of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia cry for culturally appropriate policies. There are gifts and talents in all populations, every one of them. But due to high rates of infant mortality, higher rates of psychological distress, and higher rates of cardiovascular disease amongst the Aboriginals and the Torres Straits people, the next generations are in limbo. I mention all of this because there's a strong link between health, wealth, and the concerns of educational attainment for all, including Indigenous Australians. Research has indicated that Indigenous people who remain in school, and this is around the globe, at least to 12 years, are likely to experience more positive health outcomes, less likely to adopt risky behaviors, and be involved in criminal activities. Stats from 2010 indicate that 35% of Indigenous peoples were likely to complete the year 12 or higher degree, compared to 70% of non-Indigenous peoples. Moreover, schools attendance rates in Indigenous students decreased as remoteness increased. And that's the same for the United States and most places we live and talk about. For example, in a study in 2006 indicated that school attendance for 17-year-olds reside in major cities with 44% of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders individuals, but it was 68 for non-Indigenous individuals. Attendance decreased to 16% for Indigenous peoples and very remote compared to 40%. Let's go to France. Why in Paris does the 7th arrondissement have 4 times the wealth of those who live up near Moulin Rouge, the 18th and 19th arrondissements? Marx Domey, Porte de la Chapelle, Porte de Clignancourt. This area also is known as Little Africa. There's no mistaking why that's that way. Why in the south of France, living under those bridges and on the park sides in Marseille, are nearly all Black and brown people? Why are school-aged children in Lebanon and all around the globe in the streets and not in school? Even Tokyo, the model of egalitarianism, is estimated at 3.5 million Japanese people, or 1 in 6 in the age group up to 17, experience poverty defined by the OECD. In fact, Japan's relative poverty rate has risen over the past 3 decades, to 16.5%. Compare that to the United States at 17.5% and falling, which is still high. The bottom line is that most people in the world live in poverty. 85% of the world lives on less than $30 a day. 2/3 of the population of the world lives on less than $10 a day. And 1 in every 10 people lives on less than $1.90 per day. Global poverty is one of the very worst problems that the world faces today. The poorest in the world are often hungry, regularly have no light at night, have poor health outcomes, and significantly less education. Throughout history, poverty and education are inextricably linked. So too is racism and classism. In Brazil, for example, where the poorest people, being overwhelmingly Black, as I speak here today, are being consumed by COVID-19, at a time when just 2 years ago, down in the south of Brazil, they have the ongoing Festa Confederada, where back in 1865 here in the United States, at the end of the slavery period, southern Brazil invited more than 10,000 Confederate soldiers and families down to Brazil to continue for another 25 years until 1888 and the end of slavery there. And today they still celebrate this holiday, this festival. I mentioned earlier about eugenics. The gifted education movement, as we know it, in earnest began around 100 years ago this year. The first assessments that we talk about, the first assessments that we know about, were begun in France. They begun with our guy, Alfred Binet, and there's also Theodore Simon. Simon Binet is what they called it. Now, the structured examination that Simon Binet put together were designed to help folks who were below the academic curve. Yes, the first research that became what we know now as gifted education was the design to work with people who today we would call students in special education. And gifted education is a part of special education, by the way, but we've turned it into a hierarchical system where, we look down on other forms of outliers, twice exceptional, underserved, underprivileged, and in that time they called feeble. Binet also said that there was no one score, no one test, no one measure that could capture the gifts and talents of all children, but would needed multiple methods amongst children like themselves to give a full and fair assessment. That's what would be needed. At the time, there was a movement that came out of England during this time. It began with Francis Galton. Now, Francis Galton, cousin of Darwin, wanted to recreate the royals, the noble families, and wanted to start breeding folks to keep the race alive. The movement gained traction in the United States. It really gained traction out in California. The first president of Stanford University, and this was at Stanford, this was at Harvard, this was at multiple places. The first president there, David Starr Johnson, notable eugenicist, made sure that the whole program went smoothly. As a matter of fact, just last year, they changed the name of several of the buildings that held his name there because of his involvement with the eugenics project. John Harvey Kellogg, we might know him through Kellogg's cereal, had one of the largest conglomerate of folks around the luminaries from Stanford and other places. The International Congress between 1912 and 1932 had a global venue for scientists, researchers, educators, politicians, and social leaders to plan and discuss the applications of programs to improve human heredity in the 20th century. So that's this founding president. But where we come into the picture, where gifted education comes into the picture, is one of his hires, one of the people who we all come to know. And we call him the father of gifted education. And who that is, of course, is Lewis Turman. Lewis Turman came onto the scene sometime later on, and he became the person who folks would actually go to for all of their information. He, along with his colleagues, created what they called the farm. And that's where a lot of folks went to actually learn more about eugenics. Now let's talk a little bit about Lewis Turman for a second. Lewis Turman, whoops, I've got my stuff backwards. Okay, that's when you run your own show and you have all these good, funny stuff, you start to get a little bit backed up. Anyway, so Lewis Turman, for those of us who don't know him, some of his career highlights: Stanford University professor, he was the president of an APA, father of the Stanford Binet, and had one of the longest running research projects going still, the Turman termites, more than 40, 50 years. 2002 was ranked as a highly noted professor with research. This is some of the things that he would say. In 1921, he expressed the following thoughts: a low level of intelligence is very, very common amongst the Spanish, Indian, and Mexican families of the Southwest, and also amongst the Negroes. Their dullness seems to be racial, or at least inherent from the family stocks from which they come. the whole question of racial difference in mental traits will have to be taken up anew by experimental methods. The writer predicts that when this is done, there will be discovered enormous significant racial differences in general intelligence, differences which cannot be wiped away by any scheme of mental culture. He went on to say this: children of this group should be segregated into special classes. They cannot master abstractions, but can often be made efficient workers. There is no possibility at present in convincing society that they should not be allowed to reproduce, although from a eugenic point of view, they constitute a grave problem because of their unusual prolific breeding. Father of gifted education in the United States. From that work, we would think that would end. But in 1924, the work was picked up and went across the water. This work started looking for the Aryan idea, the blonde hair, blue-eyed Nordic person. And that work began here. So Mengele, Adolf Hitler, and the rest picked up on the work that was started here in the United States, that was taken over after they found out it was ridiculous in Europe. This is what gets us to this point today. How do we move forward? Like the Confederata, like the neo-Nazi power movements across the world, the population control through mass incarceration. If you need something to read on that, Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, take a look at it. The global outrage, the police brutality, the international support of Black Lives Matter movement. All of these things say that those things that happened way in the past are still with us today in a different form. What are we doing? What can we do as researchers? Where are we? Some of the work that I've been engaged with recently, I want to share with you, and I'm going to put something in a chat. I don't know if I can put something in a chat, but I'll try. This is some of the work that some colleagues of mine have done up at Purdue University. Marsha Gentry, Yukiko Maeda, Ann Gray, and Nielsen Pereira, along with, Yukiko Maeda. Yeah, so this is some of the work that we did on what we call access denied. And I'm copying stuff right now and trying to get it so I can put it in the chat for you all. Anyway, so what I wanted to do was talk about this and give you access to this, because if you haven't done the work where you live, then this is something that I believe can actually get us all on one sheet of music in terms of where we are. So let me see if I can find that chat. I'm going to try to post it in the chat right here. Bang, and boom. Okay. I think that might get it in there. Okay. So this work right here looks at it, and I want you all to take a look at this, because this gives you an idea where we go through and we grade. And what we found from this work is that we're missing more than 3 million Black, brown, Native, low-income children in the United States. We are missing more than we are identifying. But it takes more, like I said, a village. It takes more than just 1 or 2 or 3 people. It takes a lot. Several years ago, while we were in NAGC 2017, I believe it was, several colleagues of mine, we were talking about an article that was coming out dealing with Louis Turman, as a matter of fact. That text message is going on for now 4 years. From that collaboration, several scholars have gotten together and formed what we call I-URGE, the Consortium for Inclusion of Underrepresented Racial Groups in Gifted Education. 13 scholars who are actually doing the work. And so I wanted to share some of those things with you, because we want to know what we can do. I'm a little Zoom fatigued, and I'm sure you are as well. For example, 4 days ago, I was with 70 counselors up in Detroit with the Roper Institute. 4 days before that, I was in California with the California Association for Gifted, with teachers on creativity. And next week, in 4 days, we're going to be putting on this. This is a National Association for Gifted Children sponsored event, the National Symposium on Equity for Black and Brown Students. So my brain is so ready to get off this camera, you just can't imagine. Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've all know what happened there just last year. And we are now in a place where we're starting to see the effects of children coming back to school after seeing that. We're seeing the psychological and physical trauma of children. We're deciding whether or not we're going to wear masks or not. We're deciding whether or not we're going to have kids remote or asynchronistic or synchronous. We don't know what we're going to do. The kids sense our uneasiness. Minneapolis public teachers got together with a Facebook post a couple of years ago, and at the summer of the protests that were here in the United States, and 250 of them have now signed this promise that they're going to get together. And these are principals of schools across the state. Now, I mention that because when we think about this thing called critical race theory, I want to go back and share something with you all. It may be a little bit disruptive, but I have to go back to share. No, I have it here. Okay, good. I want to take a look. So when we talk about how people take advantage of situations, people that just a couple of months ago did not even know what it was, I came across this. This man is by name of, I'm going to make it larger so you can see it and also give you his number so you can call. His name is Matt Audette. He's from Anoka Hennepin School Board in fall 2021. So this is now present. Let me read his write-up here. He says he's a conservative. Okay, I'm good with that. He says he's a veteran. Hoorah, so am I. He says a community leader. I am too. Then he says putting our kids first. I'm with you, Matt. Then he says full-time in-person learning, 21-22. Now, I don't know if Matt is a doctor or not, but I think we need to listen to what people are saying about this virus that is now starting to kill children. Then he goes on to write in here, local control of curriculum that focuses on American values and rejects critical race theory. Enriching and highlighting importance of extracurricular activities. Please support. So there's his number down the bottom if you want to give him a call and tell him how you feel about that. But this is the kind of thing we're dealing with right now. We have folks who are going to be on school boards that make decisions about what we're going to do in gifted education classes, all the way to special education classes and all across. And the first thing he puts up there is going to be critical race theory. He wouldn't know critical race theory if it slapped him right inside of his head. That's the problem. I also want to share some of my research before I turn it over in a few seconds. And this is my scholar identity model. The scholar identity model began some 16 years ago. And I started working with about 100 young African-American boys here in Nashville, Tennessee. The model has changed over time. Several changes happened up at the top with the little arrows have changed because of my international work. As a matter of fact, the cultural consciousness began in India when we're talking about the Pakistani border in India. And there was a cultural consciousness issue that they were looking at. Race consciousness changes from different hemispheres, as we know. In places like France, everybody's French. There is no race. Yet, for some reason, all the black and brown people live under the bridge. So the 9 constructs here are self-efficacy. If we're working with gifted and talented students, or we're working with students who are potential, because I want us all to be talent scouts. I want us to be able to be useful barrier breakers, not the traditional form of somebody who's going to lock the doors, bar the gates. We want people who are actually looking over, peering over into places. As I went to several very high-end schools in India, and I go through these big, gigantic doors, like the girls' school there in Hyderabad or one of those places, and I go inside and they've got equestrian tracks that go all the way around the property. They've got their own generator system because they have rolling blackouts when I was there. And they always have electricity. And I go in their uniforms, it looks beautiful. But as I walk outside the gate, 2 feet, there are puddles with kids and animals, and the poverty was it was thick. So I wanted to make sure that part of my time was allotted to teach in what they call the government schools, the schools where teachers who might show up sometime or might not, they might have a degree or might not, they might have books, they might be in 100-degree classrooms with no form of air conditioning, but that's what we want to do. So they helped me in terms of how this model looks there. And I would love to talk to you all about it. I've done it in many places, Northwest, South, and East around the globe. I've been to 6 of the 8 continents. And I heard they got a new continent down there, New Zealand, or one of them places down there. We got a new continent. We lost a planet. The world's going haywire. But anyway, self-efficacy. Can you do that thing that you plan on doing? So when we take a child and we're talking about doing this notion of performance and moving them forward and getting them engaged. I heard my biggest problem sometime with these conferences is I go and listen to other people's sessions, and that affects my session. So I tried not to do that at this conference. I did a good job, but the other ones I was affected by because I started saying, oh, I was going to say that, pull that out. Oh, I need to address that, put that in. So that's where you end up. How do we become talent scouts? I found in my population of 100 young African-American males, Latino males, who were in 4th and 5th grade and had them for 7 years, that didn't matter what their GPA was in school, that a lot of them were gifted and talented. Because a child cannot come to school every day does not make them not gifted or talented. Because a child does not have clean clothes does not make them gifted or talented. Because a child speaks foul language does not make them not gifted and talented. Makes them a pain in the butt, but then if you know most gifted and talented children, most of them are a pain in the butt. Especially when you get the little smart ones, because they are critical about everything. When we're talking about doing critical race theory, these kids are already on top of it. We're trying to hold back these stallions that want to run, and we need to be promoting, not holding them back, letting them run free, not putting gates up where they can't run. So self-efficacy, future orientation, future planning, short, medium, long-range goal planning. What are their goals? Can we instill goals in them, right? Not add another day to teaching, not add another thing to the curriculum, but actually instill that within the child, in the classroom, in math, in science, in technology, in English, whatever subject matter they may be in. Willing to make sacrifices. Kids have to be willing to give up something to do something good. They need to be motivated, and motivation is a big key to that. Internal lose control. Internal lose control means basically taking responsibility for your own actions, not blaming it on someone else. You have this self-awareness. Who are you? How are you identified? The LGBTQIA plus community is a major in this. What do I have to suppress about myself to fit in? How come we won't allow that whole person into this community? We got affiliation greater than achievement. We have a lot of young men who would rather have 6 friends than 6 A's. We have to rankify that system. We have to figure out how to get them to understand that achievement is great and you can have friends and still have achievement. Academic self-efficacy, major, because we have been telling children for so long, especially poor children, especially children who are considered minoritized, a word which I really don't like. Because globally, which we're doing here, we're talking about 92% of the population being black, brown, or other. So they're not minoritized. They might be minoritized, but they're not minorities on the global scale. Academic self-confidence has been taken away, has been shred out of their confidence. How do we put that back in? I remember walking in a classroom one day, and I walked in there with a football under my arm or a basketball, and without even telling the kids, they got up and started running to the other end, throw me a pass, or guarding me like they were playing basketball. I imagine walking in there with a big math book and throw it out on the floor and watch them jump away like it was a hand grenade or something. So academic self-confidence has been stripped from kids from the beginning. How do we put that back in them? We're losing millions of talented, gifted students because of it. Race consciousness, or in this case, cultural consciousness. Race consciousness is not something that you step in outside and you wipe it off your feet and you walk into the classroom. Race consciousness is there all the time. And it's something that we as teachers in the gifted field are afraid to discuss, although children are discussing it all the time. We need to be more courageous in our conversations with children because they are already there. I own one of them. I created a human who was gifted. She was recognized in 2017. She's a youth poet laureate. She's a phenomenal young lady. She got into every school she applied to, taking it down to Tulane with all my money in a couple of weeks. And oh my God. Anyway, so I know, because I've lived it for the last 19 years, masculinity, or in this case, gender-related issues. I don't take masculinity off there because my original research was with young men who are interested in this. They were more concerned about a book bag on their back, making them look feminine, than they were about having books in their book bag on their back. That was something we had to address, uncover. Now, will some of those young men later in life find out or already know that they are attracted to other boys or other men? Yeah, they will. But at this point right now, they're still hiding. So I had to address the issues where they live. And before I stop, I want to touch on the bottom here, because those things on the bottom are very, very important. These are called the 4 pillars of the scholar identity model. Without them, without the 4 pillars, we cannot have it. We have to promote it in school. We have to promote it first in our family involvement. Everybody talks about it, but how do we get families involved in the lives of their children? How do we keep them involved? That's something we have to master. We haven't figured that out quite yet. School relationships. How do we make sure that the school relationships are productive and not destructive? And we're talking about teachers who actually can see gifts and talents no matter where they are. I was just listening to some reports just recently where teachers were actually, I think they were talking to Jane Elliott, the woman from the Blue Eye, Brown Eye experiment from 1968. And they were actually confessing to her that when they look at children in classrooms, they have fear in their minds when they look at it. They find themselves staring at Black and brown children differently. Now, of course, in places where all the people, as well as the teachers, are Black and brown, it might be students who are from poorer neighborhoods, people who are from other groups and other socioeconomic classes. So those things still exist. Community support. How do we actually make sure that this thing happens out in the community? We have to make sure that thing happens in the community. And lastly, over here, we have mentoring and sponsorship. And that's why I go back to thinking about that future problem-solving program, international, because I think about that and I said that this kind of mentoring is exactly what is needed to actually close the gap. We do it in a lot of places. So in closing, I want us to think about this. We must be as purposeful about desegregating gifted and talented education as we were about creating segregation at the outset. Thank you for your time, and I will open up now to hear any kind of questions, comments, snide remarks. Oh, by the way, my email address is right down the bottom here, g.whiting@vanderbilt.edu. Please contact me. My words, my thoughts, my actions are not of World Gifted and World Council Gifted and Talented. It's not of the sponsor who sponsored this thing. It's not of my university. It's me. So please contact me for more information and we can talk.
Thank you very much, Gilman. Thank you for this interesting, informative, and important presentation. It's about how we really ignore too many important issues in the field of gifted education, and how we become like some kind of blinded people, not seeing too many related issues, and it's we go for the easy. Okay, it's not we don't like to sometimes to engage in more of critical thinking regarding the issues will be related to giftedness. So I've got like some questions, some interesting questions, and we can open it for more even. We have about 15 minutes, 16 or 15 minutes. So one of the questions about whether the race critical theory actually could be it's difficult sometimes to be taught in some of the U.S. states. Do you think so? And I would add to it, if it's difficult even or maybe challenging for many, not only in the U.S., even many other countries. What do you think about that? So I think maybe it's muted.
Yeah, I muted my mic. That way you can we wouldn't feed over each other. So can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So my response to that is this. critical race theory, there's probably very few on this call. I don't know how many are in the room, but there are probably very few on this call who actually have gone through any classes, K-12, 13, 16, or above, who have had classes in critical race theory. So if teachers who have a bachelor's degree or master's degree were never taught critical race theory, then the probability of them teaching it in K-12 is slim to none. As a matter of fact, as a professor of African American and diaspora studies, you would actually have to be in my program, in a law school program, or in a graduate program that talks about these kind of things to even hear about it. So what I think critical race theory, what the outcomes of that would be culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally relevant teaching, so that when we're talking about, say, for example, in the United States or in Brazil or in Belize or in Australia, we make sure we're inclusive with all parties that are involved. And I think that's the issue that we're getting at. We're trying to, I use this word often, but whitewash the educational system. In the United States, they're trying to take out Native American history, indigenous history. We don't want to teach history. So what is that about? So Texas is talking about doing it. So my response would be that colleges and universities like Vanderbilt, like Stanford, like UConn have to say that you need to take classes on history before you get allowed to come here, because we are propagating ignorance.
Okay, great. So we've got a couple of other questions regarding your model. It's about the scholar identity. One of them asking about whether yours is like a kind of pyramid. It goes like it's integrative. It goes from the bottom, up to the top. And the other question related to it, it seems like you placed masculinity at the top. So can you explain
Sure.
that? So
Yes.
in relation to the females and the
Yes.
in which you were talking about.
So thank you for your question. So first off, when I designed the model, the model itself was Afrocentric in my mind. It was a pyramid, if you can see it. It's a pyramid. And that was from ancient Africa, Egypt, by the way, which is in Africa for those who don't know. And what it did for me was to tie my students back to the motherland, to Africa. That's the reason for the pyramid. And there's three of them interacting there. And there's also strength, wisdom, and beauty, which is a Masonic order thing. The only one who has place on this thing in terms of where it's situated is self-efficacy and self-awareness. In terms of masculinity and race consciousness, they could be anywhere. There's not a hierarchy. It's not a Maslow's where if this one's gone, that one's there, or that one's at top because it's most important. These are just the ideas, the constructs, the thoughts that these young men at the time were going. And then when I found out it actually held true even through there, because gender-related issues hit right at the heart of the LGBTQI community. But young Black males, when this model was originally constructed, were not hearing that. So what I had to do was communicate with my audience who the model was designed for. But then after years of work and actually working with young ladies, working with college students, working with teachers, I've done this model with teachers in terms of where they are with regards to their scholar identity. I can ask you where you are with regards to your gender-related issues. It's so funny because one of my classes I teach, it's called Race, Sport, and American Culture. And I often ask my students at the beginning of the semester, I say, just close your eyes for a second. And they do it. They close their eyes and I said, okay, just subtly. Now, these are all first year students. I said, subtly, I want you just to raise your hand or raise your finger or nod your head or something if you thought about yourself today with regards to your race or your gender. In almost every class for 17 years, all the women and all the Black and brown students raised a finger, raised their head. And almost none of the white men in the class raised their finger. So gender-related, race-related issues are there. So just because masculinity is at the top, it doesn't mean it's most important.
I've got actually one question. It says like, how do we ensure that the kids are in front of the house, really at the forefront of the work that we're doing? So it's like we've got the kids, we've got so then they're in the front of the house, but we need to think about them in the future. Actually, what to do is like, so what to do about them, whether we're talking about kids coming from different cultural or race backgrounds or so this is a generic question, I would say.
Okay, can you state the question note and one succinct? I'm trying to catch the question here.
Yeah, it's saying, how do we ensure that the kiddos are front of house, really at the forefront of the work that we are doing?
Okay. Well, okay, so good. Thank you. For me, I think that everything I do is about the kids. You know, and we know that we have researchers, and this is okay because we need that type of research as well. We are in a place now that we can actually sit in our offices at our homes now, or in our offices at the universities or colleges or wherever we work, and we can have books brought to us either by Amazon or by some other method and never even leave the house. And we can write and we can read and we can search on the internet and pull things down and wax and wane poetically and send that out to a publisher. It gets published, and that is what it is. I spend more than half of my year. Yesterday, I was just at a scholarship brunch where we awarded 10 high school seniors from different schools around the country with $500 scholarships. It's not much, but it's more than they had before. So what I'm saying is that we need to be more involved in what we're doing with the kids. It's difficult because we're taxed with work like administrative work. We're taxed with teaching, which is how a lot of us do our jobs. And we're also taxed with running programs, gifted and talented centers, and also the reputation of those places. So we want to have success. There becomes an issue when our position and who we are climbing the academic ladder or climbing the professional ladder or who we think we are, where it takes precedence over the kids. And that for me is going to always turn out poorly for the kids. One of the things I didn't mention here was teachers who look like their children. Teachers who look like their children. In the United States and a lot of other places, the teaching force is 90+% female. And in the United States, almost 80-something% of that, high 80% of that, are European American or white teachers. And they're from middle class. So when we have the black and brown male students dropping out at such high rates, I think it has something to do with the relationship between the teachers and the students. Now, a lot of people take issue with that, but there's research, there are books out there that actually support that idea. And I know myself personally. For example, in Miami, we have a larger than normal around the US Cuban population. But you don't see a gap between white and Cuban students there because the administration, the teachers, they speak the same language. They understand when a child does something that looks like it's wild, they say, oh, Johnny's doing so-and-so, or Jose is doing so-and-so. It's not Johnny's doing good, Jose's being bad. It is, we look at them through a different cultural lens. So if we can't change the teaching force, then we need to train the teaching force to understand the differences in children so that we can capture all of those nuances. And also say we need to measure children against the children they live with. If I have a children who's living in poverty, and that child is succeeding higher than all the other children around them, but they're not meeting the standards of the mainstream or white kids in this case, then that kid needs to be moved somewhere. That child needs to be looked at. So again, I go back to saying that we need to be talent scouts. And a scholar identity for me is one of those ways to actually be able to put that into our curriculum without having pull-out sessions, without having extra time, without having, now you might have to have professional developments, you might have to have teacher training. This is what I did all around India, and they're using it right now.
Okay, there is a question about we've got such a complex situation, but at the end, we need to think about how to begin to improve the equity in gifted education. So too many talks, too many things, okay, but at the end, we need to start from somewhere. So what do you suggest?
You know, if I had that magic bullet, if I had the magic bullet that can tell all of us right now what to do to end this whole thing, trust me, I'd give it to you. I'd swear to God, I'd give it to you. But I know that everything is site specific. The scholar identity, I think of it this way. If I were to go outside and take a handful of seeds and throw it on the ground, the chances of all of those seeds, or even most of those seeds, taking and growing is almost slim to none. So I have to prepare that ground. I have to plow it up, have to move the soil, I have to move the rocks, all that stuff. I have to then fertilize it, put the seeds in there, cover them up, water it, nurture it, and take care of it. Then maybe they'll grow. So that means I have to do some preparation beforehand. We want, as I said earlier, Frederick Douglass quote, we want the beautiful oceans without the roars and all that stuff that they have with it. We want the flowers without the terrible rains that come with it. He says that struggle with no progress is not going, progress with no struggle is not going to happen. We need to make sure that we understand going forward what it means. So in Lebanon, I would have to work with teachers in Lebanon, or you work with teachers in Lebanon to say that, how does scholar identity model work in context of Lebanon? And Lebanon is not just one monolithic group. There are different folks there in Australia, in New Zealand, in Great Britain, in wherever we are. There are all different needs for different populations. And matter of fact, there's different needs for folks here in Nashville, Tennessee than there are up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There's different needs out in California than there are in Florida. They're different up in New York as well. So what I'm saying is that the model needs to be constructed so that you work with the children that are there. There's no one universal anything that works. That's the problem with standardized tests. Standardized tests are created by psychometricians. Hey, I love them and I hate them at the same time. I went through a rigorous program at Purdue University, and what I learned most about it was that someone told me, a mathematician tells me that stats lie, and people use the stats lie even more. So my thing is that we have this if-then. If we could test the whole population, then we'd find this. So we've got so tied up in, again, this numerical value, this numerical score, this data-driven thing where we've lost sight of the fact that I can see with my own eyes that this child is suffering. I don't need to see 2,700 of them. I don't need to see data that are 5 and 6 years old, because heck, all of us are working with data that is outdated. By the time we get to data, even OCR data, Office of Civil Rights data we use here in the United States, by the time we get it, it's 3 years old. Do you know how much changed in the last 3 years in this world? And we think we're going to have the same results, but we need something. We can look at trends, I get that. But we need to actually work on this with space and place specific strategies.
Dr. Gilman, it's like a quick two questions in, I don't know, in 1 minute. You highlighted them anyway. It's like, since we are not sure about how to start, and we've got too many things to think about, but already you highlighted two important issues. Like the first one related to the administration, the school administrators, and the one above, who are controlling, everything, and they've got their own dogmas. And the second is about those people who we consider as the father, maybe like the father of the gifted education, or maybe the pioneers in gifted education, but they've got their own biases and prejudices in the field. So two important and quick ones. Do you know, like there is a way to start with those ones, challenging such, thoughts coming from well-known people in the field of gifted education, or maybe challenging the administrations? Do you think this is the start sometimes?
Thank you for the question. I definitely think that challenging administration is it, but here's the problem. And I always say this. I said that the teacher tends to be weary of the principal, and the principal in the U.S. context, is weary of the superintendent. The superintendent is weary of the board. The board is weary of the parent. The parent is weary of the child, and the child's not weary of anybody. So we've got this vicious cycle now where no one seems to be able to move because everybody's catering and pandering to somebody else. A politician, for example, like the guy, Matt Audette, that I put up earlier. We have folks who are making decisions about our children who making decisions for their own personal gain to move forward. So parents' voices and teacher advocacy will go farther than anything else. Parents are very powerful, but parents don't know that. So we as educators need to educate parents as well. With regards to, I wasn't quite sure on the question about Turman and those folks there, but what I was saying in terms of this is that the system of gifted education began not for the masses. Like college and universities, you, and many of us on this call, women, folks, black, brown, we're not supposed to be there holding PhDs. We've changed that system up. So we have to understand that right now there still are folks who are breaking down barriers that are still there. We can look at the disparate impact of tenure and promotion of black and brown scholars. We can look at the way that black and brown scholars research is not accepted as the same if it's not meeting a certain kind of, and I don't know about this standard, because a lot of standards do become very objective, subjective. You be the judge. So there's a problem there. How do we now move forward so that we can be more equitable for scholars, for folks who are writing on the LGBTQ community, writing on women scholars, feminist scholars, folks who write about black poor children in any country, anywhere? How do we get those pieces of information into top tier journals? How do we get that kind of information to where it makes sense, where people feel like, oh, the work I want to do is here, but I have to do this work because this is what gets me tenured and promoted? There becomes an issue because now we become, we walk with blinders on.
Dr. Gilman Whiting, the director of the African American and Diaspora Studies at Vanderbilt University, I would like to thank you again for all of this interesting information and this, challenging thoughts that we have to think about in the field of gifted education. I would like also to thank the Future Problem Solving Program International for sponsoring the this keynote, and thanking all of my colleagues for this brilliant management of this conference. Thank you very much. And now we'll be moving to the closing with the conference, this important conference, and this is the first virtual conference for the history of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Julia Link Roberts. What an honor it has been to serve as your president for the past 4 years. I assumed the presidency of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children at Sydney, Australia in 2017, and will pass the virtual gavel to Dr. Denise Blythe as I conclude these remarks. As you will remember, members of the executive committee must represent different countries. For the past 2 years, members of the executive committee have been Dr. Leonie Kronberg of Australia, Dr. Tracy Riley of New Zealand, Mrs. Sue Pryor of Hong Kong, Dr. Anis Alaroub of Jordan, Dr. Margaret Sutherland of Scotland, and Leonore van Groeven of the Netherlands. What an outstanding group of executive committee members they have been. Our meetings via Zoom have been productive, even when they started at 4 a.m. in Bowling Green, Kentucky. High points of the last 4 years have been the conferences in Sydney, Nashville, and our virtual conference that we are just concluding. Another highlight has been the friendships that have been with members in many countries across the world. I certainly want to acknowledge Gifted and Talented International and recognize that it is the dedication of Leonie Kronberg as chief editor, the editors who have supported the journal, and the scholars from around the world who submitted their manuscripts for publications. All of them have worked so hard to enhance the quality of Gifted and Talented International. A definite highlight of the 4 years has been the formal launch of Global Principles for Professional Learning in Gifted Education at this conference. This document is available on the World Council website, as is the poster that focuses on the 10 principles. A special thank you goes to Dr. Norma Heffenstein, who chaired this initiative, and to the committee members from around the world who contributed their perspectives in the development of the principles. Now it is up to you, members of the World Council, and participants in this conference to disseminate the global principles for professional learning in gifted education in order that the principles will be used when decisions are made at local, regional, and national levels. I want to thank Dr. Tyler Clark, Executive Administrator of the World Council, for his dedication to the Council, to many things, but especially to the Council's first virtual World Conference. As the video just detailed, more than 600 people have participated in this conference, and the virtual conference has allowed professional learning to continue for our organization in a time when the pandemic has kept us in our local settings. I have learned a lot at this conference and have appreciated connections with individuals across the globe. Thank you to members of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children for the honor of receiving the World Council Distinguished Service Award. Thank you for 4 years as president of the World Council. Now I pass the virtual gavel to Denise Blythe. I know the World Council is in good hands with you, Denise, as the president.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your kind words. You are inspiration for me. It was in the 80s, when I was a master's student at the University of Brasilia in Brazil, that I first heard about the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. My advisor, Dr. Eunice Alencar, told me she was going to present a paper at the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. At that point, I made a mental note that I would someday attend this conference. Being a student from a developing country, it seemed almost impossible to reach this goal, considering financial, linguistic, and cultural barriers. In the 90s, Dr. Alencar encouraged me to pursue my PhD in the United States. I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship from the Brazilian government. In September 1995, I began my doctoral studies at the University of Connecticut. To me, it was a new start with lots of exciting challenges. I have the best memories of those times. As part of my academic challenge, my academic development, I was encouraged to submit proposals to Conference on Gifted Education. The 12th World Conference was held July 30 through August 1st, 1997, in Seattle, Washington, with the theme of Connecting the Gifted Community Worldwide. I submitted a proposal and it was accepted. I was thrilled with the opportunity to attend my first World Conference. Still today, I remember the lectures from keynote speakers whose books and articles I have read since I was a master's student in Brazil. My dream did come true. I became a member of the World Council and later I represented Brazil as delegate. In 2013, I was elected to be a member of the Executive Committee. I was so proud to be the first Brazilian to be chosen for this position. I learned a lot with my colleagues from the Executive Committee, and I thank all of them. As the president of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children, I intend to continue my journey advocate for gifted education. I'm also proud to be the first South American president of the World Council. Never in my wildest dream did I imagine this could happen. But dreams can come true. It's such an honor to serve as the president of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. For the next 4 years, I envision the World Council as an organization that will consolidate an international network to promote the exchange of information among educators, psychologists, researchers, and parents of the gifted. Encourage advancement of studies on gifted and creativity, bring together as member of the World Council a large number of people interested in giftedness, disseminate evidence-based knowledge on talent development, encourage professional development programs on giftedness for educators and psychologists, support identification and intervention programs for gifted and talented children around the world, and create a constructive and creative dialogue with the gifted community. I hope the World Council will have the potential to continue to serve the needs and the dreams of gifted and talented children all over the world. I will do my best. Dear members and delegates, thank you very much for your trust and support. I look forward to a productive and collaborative partnership. I would also like to thank Dr. Julia Roberts and Dr. Leonie Kronborg for all their work in favor of the gifted while served as President and Vice President of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. For the members of the new Executive Committee, Margaret Sutherland, Tracy Riley, Sue Pryor, Eleanor Van Gavran, Amos Elleroux, and Browen McFarland, I look forward to a fertile and comparative work. My special thanks to Dr. Tyler Clark for planning this conference so well, for all his support and outstanding work as the Executive Administrator of the World Council. Many thanks to Mike Munch from SpotMe and his colleagues for their technological support. They did a phenomenal job. Our world is facing an unprecedented health crisis, and therefore, it's imperative that we use our resources and talents to overcome this challenging situation, as well as others that we are still unable to anticipate. In this regard, I believe the World Council can make a difference in the life of gifted children worldwide by ensuring the realization of their available potential to the benefit of humankind. Thank you all for attending the first virtual conference of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. I declare the 24th Biennial World Conference closed. I hope to meet all of you in person at the 2023 conference. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Have a great day. Have a great week. Thank you very much.